Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. So sorry for the technical difficulties that just occurred. As you probably are aware, something weird happened with the Zoom link that was on our website. And so this webinar was supposed to be a live, real-time, interactive deal, but things happen. So I'm recording it now. Hopefully you're able to easily watch it from wherever you are now. So again, my apologies for that, but thank you anyway for being here, for spending your time wherever you are watching this today. So my name is Olivia, and I am the South County Prevention Coordinator here at Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County. And I'm really excited to be chatting with you all today. We are going to be talking about college and relationships, and this webinar is specifically geared toward parents or guardians of people who are going to college. So really quick, I'm gonna just share my presentation. All right, awesome. So as I said, talking about college and relationships, and this is the second of two parts, or of two college and relationships series. And so the first one, as you can see on our YouTube, if you go to that, was aimed toward teens who are going to college or who are thinking about it. So this one, as I mentioned, is for the supportive adults in those teens' lives who want to also be a part of that transition, think about relationships, all that good stuff. So hopefully it'll be a good conversation today. Again, of course, it was supposed to be a little bit more interactive, but technology got in the way of that, slash maybe our own human error. But we're making it work. And I'm actually going to just put the, actually, I can't do that because it's not a live thing. So I guess I can't use the chat, but if you go to Domestic Violence Services on YouTube, you can find all of our previous webinars, most of our previous webinars, and that includes the latest college webinar, which I did a couple of weeks ago. And I think that one is really helpful, especially if you are watching this one, even if you aren't a teen going to college. Good stuff to know and good stuff to talk about. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into our agenda today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, before we really dive into the meat of things here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how there's kind of an umbrella here of what feels right to you and to your family, right? Of course, all of this, I might be saying things like, I would recommend this, I wouldn't recommend this. And of course, all of this is with the preface of you are the expert of your own life. You're the expert of your own family and your own situation and the dynamic that you might have with your youth. And so definitely we'll talk about this more, but not here to tell anyone what's right or wrong or how to parent or how not to parent. But given all that, we are going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that, again, I covered in the first college webinar. We're going to be talking about independence kind of as a state that your youth is going to be in as they are going off to college. They're maybe living on their own, perhaps for the first time. They might be moving maybe states or cities for the first time. And even if they're not, it's just a whole new world that they're going to be in, one in which they're going to be a lot more independent, most likely, than they were in high school or in their teenage years and growing up. We'll talk broadly about their college experience, what that can look like. Of course, that can take a million different forms, and the relationships that they might be forming, how they might be forming them, all of that stuff. There's so many just endless possibilities. So we'll talk about some of that today as well. We'll also talk about managing expectations, how expectations might play into this time in your youth's life, into this transition period, not only for them, but also for you, and how the two of you or all of you can navigate that dynamic together. And of course, we will talk about supporting your youth, how to be there for them, how to support them during this time. It's a really crazy time, a lot of change. And then, so the your turn part was supposed to be if this were a live thing and I could see all of you in the chat and it would be great, you'd be introducing yourself. But we can imagine that we're going to be doing this together. There's going to be a part at the end that was supposed to be a little bit more interactive. You were going to get a chance to, I don't want to say practice as if there's a right way or wrong way, but just to go over some scenarios. And I'll provide those scenarios. And even now, even when it's not live, I would really, really encourage you to maybe, if you're watching this with a friend or someone else, just to think through some of these scenarios. You can talk through them, maybe write them down if you want to. Of course, if it were live, you'd be interacting in the chat, you'd be having dialogues with each other and with me, but I'll still share the scenarios and we'll make it work, because that's what we've all been doing for the last 2.5 years. So, all right. So with that, that's our agenda today. And yeah, I wish I could be like, if you have any questions, let me know, but we're just going here. So first things first, again, before we really start to dive into the content, is the large umbrella that prefaces all of this, and that is do what feels right to you and right to your youth, right for your family. Also, I'm going to be using the word youth here. We're talking about young people entering college, young adults, late adolescents, but that's a whole lot, that's a mouthful. And I don't want to be like, here's what you should be doing with your kid, right? Because a lot of what we're talking about today is we are talking about adults. They are young adults and going into a really transformative period potentially in their lives. And so I'm going to be referring them to youth or young people, but that's who I mean, even though of course they are maybe your children, your kids, but also just want to be inclusive of, there could be all kinds of people, guardians watching this video. So that's the language that I'll be using today. But yeah, again, definitely not here to tell anyone how to parent or how not to parent, or to be a guardian. My goal, as well as hopefully, probably a lot of your goals, is to make sure that your youth are safe, that they're supported, and that hopefully they're happy when they're going off to college and as they enter into this new and exciting period in their lives. So that's the goal. And of course, want to recognize that all different families or different units handle all of their family stuff, all their interactions, all their dynamics in lots and lots of different ways. And that's great. Some of these might be informed by different cultural contexts, maybe different routines or norms that are just a part of that family, a part of the culture or background in which you come from. And again, with everything that I'm going to be saying and we'll be talking about today, you're absolutely encouraged to shape it and form it to what fits you and your youth best and the way that you've raised them and grown up together. And of course, that being said, it would be amazing if you all could have open minds during this presentation. So really trying to approach this and this conversation from a standpoint of what's going to make your youth feel the most supportive as they're going into this period in their lives. So this might look like suggesting or considering having a conversation with them if you are thinking about maybe changing some of those family routines or norms, and just remembering that there's always room for change and for growth. And so sort of two things here, right? On one hand, do you do what feels comfortable for your family? You're the expert. And on the other hand, even given that, there's always room for improvement, constructive improvement, and for growth. And so hopefully those things can kind of coexist. And I would love if people could keep that in mind as we are going through this presentation today. All right, so the first big topic that we're going to talk about, and that I think this is really, really huge as young people are going off to college, they're going off to a new space with a lot of new people, a lot of new voices, is giving them the space to talk if they want it, right? They might be going into a really overwhelming social situation, academic situation, athletic situation, whatever it is, and just giving them a space to just talk, vent, be themselves, that can be really huge. So something that might work, this might work maybe more effectively in some families than others with different contexts and different ways that you all have sort of grown up together, I like to say, is an open door policy. So this can work really well, just kind of creating a dynamic and a policy in which your youth knows that they can come to you at any time if they have a question, maybe about a relationship that they're in, an interaction that they're having, if they're looking for advice, if they just want to talk through something, if they just want to like let you know about something that's going on, maybe just for fun. just, and this is nothing more than just a norm, like my door's open, use it if you want. And again, this might work a lot better, perhaps, if you have a dynamic already established in your family where maybe your youth likes to come to you with this kind of thing. Maybe you have a relationship with them in which it's totally normal for them to come to you and be like, oh, you wouldn't believe what happened today with so-and-so, or with this person I'm seeing, or with this group of friends. Maybe you're really involved in that. Maybe you want to be, but they haven't been so receptive to that. Also, that's totally normal, totally fine as well. But there are, of course, lots of families and units and contexts in which that's not the case, in which, you all might be super close, but you all might not necessarily talk about things like that. You might not feel super comfortable sharing, or they might not feel super comfortable sharing things like that. And of course, that's totally fine as well. And so again, definitely not forcing anything. It's absolutely, of course, their decision, what they want to talk about, talk through with you. At the end of the day, probably forcing them to talk through just their everyday social dynamics, if they're really uncomfortable with it, probably won't benefit them a ton. I know that personally, in my experience, when I was going off to college, my parents and I were always really, really close. Very lucky to have a great relationship with both of them. But I was really not the kind of young person who really liked sharing all of my kind of personal, interpersonal, social stuff with them. That was just not my thing. I felt, they knew my friends and everything, but I didn't really come to them with any drama or with any social updates. But as college went on, I actually sort of became a lot more comfortable doing that. For whatever reason, a lot of different reasons. I actually came to really think of my parents, my family, as a really good support system for that stuff. So again, in my case, that happened super naturally. It wasn't because they were forcing me to talk about any of it. It was, again, I felt comfortable. I felt like they were there if I needed them, and if not, also fine. So this can be a really great way to just let youth know that they have that space. And another way that this can sometimes be accomplished, if we're talking about youth forming new relationships at college, being in this new place they're probably dealing with a lot, is perhaps setting a regular time for like a phone call or a FaceTime or a video call of some kind. And of course, this can adjust as the years go by. Maybe their first year of college, they're doing it more often. And then as they get more comfortable and kind of get some roots there, they don't feel the need to do it as much. You might feel the need to do it, maybe even more, but that's a whole other thing, right? And so this might work well if you're already coming into this phase of their life being pretty close, right? That might come pretty naturally. Like, yeah, let's talk every week. But even if you aren't, you don't have to necessarily have that context. Suggesting or just even planting the seed for this idea for having some kind of regular time to talk, whether it's every week, every month, or every other something, it can feel almost like, I don't want to put it too professionally, but almost like an office hours of some kind. And this is just so that they never have to feel like, oh, I really kind of do actually want to bring this thing up with my mom or my stepdad or my grandpa or whoever, but I'm like not really sure when. They might be busy, like I don't really know. Just to kind of take that burden off of your youth, because they're likely dealing with so much of that already as they are going into this new space, as they are navigating all these new relationships that they're forming. It might be really nice for them to just know in the back of their mind, even if they're not consciously thinking about it, that they do have a regular block of time where, again, your door's open, where they can come to you and either just chat, make small talk, do whatever you do on your phone calls, or if they do have a question, if they are wondering about something with a relationship, even if they've never asked you a question like that before, that time is there. And so even, again, if you aren't necessarily super close, or if you don't have that kind of relationship going in, this might be an effective way, if you and your youth are, of course, both on board, if you want to move toward that. Again, talking about this with them, seeing if it's something that they're open to and they want to do. Again, it could potentially help them if they feel like they would like a space to open up about a relationship question they have, a friendship question. It's, again, they have that block of time. If they need it, if they want to use it, it's their time. So they can, of course, make that decision. Like I said before, these are essentially adults that we're talking about here. So independence, this is a huge one. And again, I'll say it for the millionth time. If you haven't at least kind of browsed through the first in this series, the first webinar in the series, the pre-college for teens, I would really recommend that you do that, even though, of course, all of you are not likely teens going to college. I think it's a really helpful framework, especially with which to view this particular webinar, because it covers a lot of the dynamics and the feelings and the relationships that might be going on as your youth is going into this time. And one of these things that is covered in that webinar as well is independence. This is kind of what people think of first and foremost when they think of going off to college. Again, for a lot of youth, it is the first time that they're super independent. Might be the first time they're living away from home or living on the other side of the country, or what have you. Excuse me. And so when we are talking about independence, probably something that comes up for you as a guardian, as a supporter, as a person who cares a lot about the youth in question, is this idea of control and monitoring, right? Like, you've been maybe their caretaker for their whole life, maybe not, maybe you're just really involved in their life, maybe you're close to them, but you're invested in them and you want to make sure that they're safe and supported, but hopefully you also want to respect that independence that they're having. And especially when we are talking about relationship formation, you want to respect their ability and their kind of trial and error of doing that by themselves, kind of away from you. And so it's this push and pull of how much do you want to monitor them? How much do you want to dictate what they're doing, right? It might be tempting. And of course, again, I say this with the context of people come from different backgrounds, people have different norms and cultures within their family. So of course, take that grain of salt. But in general, my suggestion is try not to monitor or control too much from afar. I know that's much easier said than done. When you're concerned, when you're curious, right? Those things can feel pretty natural. But again, this is a really, really formative time for youth. And they are probably going to make mistakes. Other people are going to make mistakes around them, and they're probably going to learn from those things. Especially if you do live close by, if your youth is going to college maybe near you, still trying to let them have that independence as much as possible, even though it might feel tempting, right? Like, oh, we can just see each other, I can come swing by, and maybe they want that, and that's totally, totally fine. But just making sure that we're not necessarily squashing that independence, because that is a super, super important aspect in relationship forming and in their learning how to be a person who forms meaningful relationships and discovers those things about themselves while they're at this new place. And of course, when they come home, right, this is always kind of a dynamic, I think, with people going away to college and then coming home for breaks or to visit or whatnot, really trying to understand that they've been living on their own at this point when they come back to visit, and they can make their own decisions. They are capable of doing that. And of course, it's totally understandable to want to have consistent rules under your own roof, all of that stuff. So if you do feel the need to keep rules in place that they were made to follow before college, maybe my suggestion is having an open conversation about this, making this at least a dialogue that you're having with your youth instead of kind of an edict. Or maybe be open to small adjustments. Maybe you still have a curfew, but we can make it a little bit later. These are just suggestions. And I do bring these up just to kind of circle back to the reason that we're all here, because what I'm invested in personally, as I am a prevention coordinator and I work at this agency, is their relationship formation, making sure that they can form healthy relationships and they have the tools to be able to do that on their own and to make decisions on their own. And again, sometimes that does come with mistakes, right? And mistakes are a part of life. You also might worry that from afar that they're spending too much time with their friends or going to too many parties or spending too much time with their romantic partner, right? It's really easy, at least I know for my brain, to get super wrapped up in just worries. What could go wrong? I don't know if some of you are like that as well. But maybe, they should be spending more time doing their classes or on their athletics or whatever else they might be doing. And of course, as always, follow what the norm is in your family, what they feel comfortable with, and what you do. But trying to offer them support if they ask for it. Hey, dad, I'm really, maybe you have a relationship where they might say something like, I'm really invested in this friend group, but I'm also feeling really stressed about this upcoming psych test that I have, right? If that's something that you all will talk through, then totally great. But in general, again, trying not to be too controlling, trying not to monitor that too much. Again, maybe only intervening if it's absolutely necessary, if it's clear that something is really wrong. And even in those situations, trying to approach it as a supporter rather than as an enforcer. Hey, maybe you're having some trouble with your grades in this particular course because you're spending a lot of time with your partner. Let's talk about it. How can we fix this together? We, at this agency, we talk a lot about healthy relationships and healthy conflict. So this is actually kind of a meta point here, but you can have a healthy dialogue about this. You can approach this conflict by saying things like, I want to solve this issue with you, not I am going to win this argument. I'm going to be your enforcer. I'm going to tell you what to do. Probably approaching it as a mutual conversation and problem solving exercise will go over a little bit better with them and hopefully allow them to keep those relationships intact that they're so invested in. So looking at really broadly their experience and their relationships. And again, this is most of the meat of what I talk about in the first part of this college webinar series. So would love if people wanted to go back and reference that, but just to go over it really quickly now, some stuff to kind of think about on your end, to be prepared for on your end as their guardian or previous caretaker or an adult that's really invested in their lives. Be prepared that their moods might change. Things might be a little bit up and down sometimes. And that can be a normal part of college. College can be a pretty tumultuous time. Of course, if it's getting dramatic, if it's concerning, again, you have the spidey senses, you know your youth. I don't know them. So definitely, absolutely trust your gut, trust your instincts if you think something is wrong. We'll talk about support later on. But in general, sometimes, they might be really busy, stressed, frantic, excited, energized. Sometimes they might be a little bit more tired. They might be sad. They might be stressed. These things are going to happen. And of course, when we care about someone, it's totally natural to want to be like, I want to protect you from feeling all those bad things. But as we often like to say here in this department, this agency, there aren't bad feelings. There are bad actions that you can do with those feelings, but people are going to feel sad. People are going to feel hurt. People are going to feel stressed out. Those things are going to happen. And so, especially in this tumultuous transitional time, that may happen. And it's just something really, really good to be prepared for and to look out for. In general, when you are talking to them, maybe about anything, about their life at college, listen to them. Let them take the lead on what they want to talk about in general. Of course, unless you have a really urgent or specific question, maybe they really want to talk to you about your classes, or about their classes. Maybe they're super excited to tell you all about this new professor that they have. But maybe they're not super excited to talk about their friendships that they're making. And this could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe, again, like I said, that context has been that they like to keep their family life and their social life separate. There's no reason that has to change, especially not overnight. So that can totally still be in place. Another reason might be, especially if it's kind of early on in the college experience, they might be having a little bit of trouble making new friends, and that's totally understandable. It's a really, if any of you went to college, you might remember it's a really daunting experience to walk in and with 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever number of strangers and be like, all right, time to make friends, right? So it might be taking a while. It might be stressing them out. Maybe their time of talking to you is a nice, relaxing time for them where they can fall back on this relationship they have with you that's comfortable. And they don't necessarily feel like talking about their friendships. So another really important point is validating their relationships. If they are telling you about relationships that they're having or that they're forming, of course, you probably have a significant number of years on them. You have more perspective, you have more life experience. And some of the things they might say might sound kind of like puppy love to you, or sound a little bit silly or just kind of funny. And regardless of how that might feel to you, if they're telling you about it, especially if they seem earnest about it, it's serious to them. And if it's serious to them, then it's serious, period. That's kind of the way that I like to think about these things. This also does have some safety implications as well. One of the big problems with, if we're talking about relationships that escalate into violence, into abuse, especially with teenagers, is that many teens actually won't report instances of dating violence in their relationships because they are under the impression that they're not going to be taken seriously, not only in terms of being believed or not believed, which is, of course, a whole other issue, but also just in terms of the way that society at large conceptualizes young love or teen relationships or just high school flings, college flings. And that's a really big, it can be a really big barrier for reporting and for getting help and getting support. And so I think even when it's just a total fun thing, no signs of danger, no red flags, it's just really important to take their relationships seriously, especially if they're signaling to you that they want them to be taken seriously. Proximity. This is a big thing that I talk about in the first half of this series. Your youth is going to be around a lot of new people, as I mentioned, and this might make them excited. It might make them anxious. It probably will make them a combination of both. And there's a lot of ways that you can play a role in this proximity dynamic that's going to be occurring for them. My suggestion is refraining from trying to tell them who to hang out with or who to be around. And this might be difficult, right? Maybe when your youth was growing up, maybe when they were in high school and they would have friends over, you, because it was your house, maybe you could tell them, I don't want this person here. And they sort of had to defer to that. This is different. They're on their own. They're going to figure this out on their own. They're going to figure out for themselves, I thought I was friends with this person, but they're actually acting a little shady. And I think I'm going to make the decision to not be their friend anymore. And this is something that they are going to be learning now that they're away from home and they're making these decisions for themselves. Another way that you can have an impact on this proximity dynamic is modeling or signaling to them that it's okay to spend time alone, reinforcing that this is a perfectly healthy thing to do. I know a lot of people in college will sort of get caught up in there's friends everywhere, there's people everywhere, and everyone's going out. What is everyone doing? And sometimes they might want to actually deep down just take a second for themselves. So just modeling that that's okay to do, totally healthy to do as well. They might share that they're going somewhere or doing something or hanging out with some people, but you might be able to tell they're not that excited about it, or they might share that they're not that excited about it. Perhaps you can ask them why it feels important to them to go. And again, not in a judgmental way or anything, but just being like, hey, like, yeah, so what's the draw here, right? And then understanding if they seem different. Maybe they seem a little bit different from the day that you dropped them off or the day that they got on that plane. And that's okay. You don't need to panic about that. A lot of youth can feel this pressure to, especially early on in college, maybe reinvent themselves now that they're in this new place. Again, we talked about that might seem a little silly looking in on it from the outside, perhaps, but to them, and then therefore in general, it does feel serious. It feels like a new place, time to get serious, time to be this person. So again, I talk a lot about that in the previous webinar as well. And then, of course, a really great way to support them in their college experience and their relationship formation is being open to their new curiosities. And I'm purposely leaving that wide open. That can cover all kinds of different things: hobbies, academic interests, if we're talking about relationships, new friendships, new friend groups, new clubs, new romantic partners, right? Trying to be open and embracing the fact that they are into this new environment with a ton of new different stimulations and they are exploring everything. So talking now about supporting your youth, and this is a hugely important one. Hopefully it's why you're all here today, as they're navigating relationships and perhaps difficult moments that they might be having, as everyone has in their life. If your youth does share with you that something bad has happened to them, and again, this is a really broad statement as well, if they're feeling uncomfortable, if they are nervous about someone in their life, in their circle, if they've had an experience of assault or abuse, these can be incredibly frightening things, of course, to experience, traumatic things to experience, but also really, really, really scary to hear as a guardian, as a supporter, as someone who cares about them. So when I say do your best to stay calm, I don't want that to sound trivializing. I don't mean that to say, oh, well, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, right? Of course, this is an absolutely terrifying and devastating thing to hear. But again, if we are talking about supporting them, making them feel safe, making them feel calm, we're focusing our energy on them, on listening to them, not on your freak out or whatever is happening inside. You're listening to them. You're letting them tell you what happened. You're letting them know that you believe them, right? Even if that might be implied, like, of course, they think you believe them if they're coming to you, all of that. It's a very empowering, very, very validating thing to hear. I believe you. It does not hurt. And of course, the big one is ask how you can best support them. And this might feel a little bit backwards, right? Maybe for the whole 18-ish years that they've been alive, you've been the one kind of saying, okay, here's what I think you should do, right? Here's how I think you should handle this rude teacher. Here's what I think you should do to get into this club. You're actually in this situation, you're asking them, what can I do to help? How can I be there for you? And that doesn't mean you can't make suggestions, and they might be asking you for suggestions, and of course, all of that. But really, again, they are in some ways entering adulthood. And so we do want to respect their autonomy and respect their agency, especially if they have had an experience in which they might feel like that agency, that autonomy, their independence, their personhood has been violated in some way. It's really important that you as their supporter are countering that and are being there for them. And then, of course, just broadly understanding if they need help with something. And this can be, doesn't even have to be anything serious. If they need help with a person that they met, if they need help with a class question, just because they're at college, it doesn't mean that they're going to have everything figured out overnight the night they get there. They might need stuff from you. And especially if you have that background with them where you are someone that they go to, just understand they're still figuring it out. They're adjusting. All right. And then, of course, we want to talk about your experience and their experience. So this slide's particularly for parents or guardians who themselves went to college. So if you did go to college, maybe you had a great experience, maybe you had a not so great experience, probably it was somewhere in between and both. But in general, I would suggest trying not to impose too much upon them before they go. Answering questions, giving advice, all totally, totally great. But trying not to set expectations for them. This is what college should feel like. This is what it's going to be like on day 5. This is what's going to be like 6 months in, right? Here's how I felt. That can create a lot of pressure. And, they're probably already feeling tons and tons of pressure from a lot of different outlets. It might also give them, again, this preconceived notion of what college should look like. And then who knows what might happen if things don't line up to actually match that when they get there. Also looking specifically at romantic or intimate partnerships and relationships, understanding that dating and whatever else might be happening with college people might look really different from how it did when you were in college. And just trying to understand that, trying to have an open mind. You don't have to agree with it. It doesn't have to be something that you would do, but just understanding that time happens, change happens. And I know that can be hard. All right. So at this point, This is where, if we were all together in real time, you all would be warming up your chat fingers and we'd be having some fun dialogues in the chat about some scenarios. So if you are watching this, I would really, really love it if you would maybe grab a pen and paper if you're feeling old-fashioned, maybe open up a new window on your computer, like a Google Doc or Word doc or whatever. Maybe you're with someone and you could talk things through with them. That's also a great way to do this. But we're going to go over some scenarios. And so for each scenario, you can, it says type in the chat, but you can do any of those other things I just mentioned, how you might respond or handle the situation. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers here. This is just not just for fun, but it's just an exercise. It's not being graded. It's not being reported to anything. And of course, stay true to yourself, stay true to your dynamics. Again, no one's looking at this except for you. This is just for you to get in the habit of thinking about some of these things. And so make it realistic, right? It might not be a perfect answer. And then even if it doesn't feel like a perfect answer to you, maybe you can go back to it later and think, okay, this is how I would handle it given the current dynamic that I have. How might I make this even more supportive for my youth while still feeling comfortable about it myself? So in a way, there's some silver linings about us not being all together right now, because you can have as much space and time to do this as you want. So I'm going to go to the first scenario right now, and I'll read out loud and explain a little bit. So you are on a weekly FaceTime call with your youth. They're off at college. You talk every week. It's great. And this week, they're a little bit quieter than usual. Nothing too concerning, but they also keep like pausing the FaceTime. It says like video paused. And you can kind of hear them texting, or they're looking kind of concerned. They're swiping around on their phone. And you're noticing that, but nothing too concerning. And you're hanging up the phone, you're wrapping up your conversation, and you're wrapping up, you're saying, all right, see you next week, talk to you next week. And they kind of stall a little bit, they sigh, they look in the camera, they go, all right, well, thanks for calling when you said you would. At least someone in this world can stick to their word. Okay, so I'll leave that there for a second. I'll give you maybe a minute or 30 seconds or so to write down some responses, some feelings that you might have about that. What do you think is going on here with them? Could be multiple answers. Again, there's not like an answer I'm looking for. Maybe if this was your youth, how would you respond? What would you do? So I'm going to give it a little bit here. All right. So of course, feel free to pause this video, take as much time as you need. But just in the interest of the actual recording time, I'm going to keep moving. So some things that might be going on here. And again, this could be a billion things, and it totally depends on the person. When I read this scenario, I am sensing some signaling. They might be signaling to you that they want to talk about something. They're using a veiled comment. They're using a little bit of sarcasm, snarkiness, but it's not really aimed at you, right? They're thanking you for being this great moral kind of grounding force in their life right now, but that's implying something is a little bit off somewhere else. Someone's not responding to them. Someone is making them anxious. And maybe they want to talk about this with you. The fact that they brought it up, maybe it was enough for them to just kind of say this comment and then let it go. That is totally possible as well, but they might want to talk some more. So generally, always ask, right? Can't hurt to ask. And it doesn't have to be this big, like, hey, let's talk. It can be, but it could also be like, oh, you good? right? A check-in, whatever that might look like for you and them. And of course, they might say, no, fine. In which case we're taking their word and supporting them, as I mentioned. But they might be like, actually, yeah, there's something going on, right? So always ask. And this is a situation where it might be really, really great to instate that open door policy. If they don't want to talk right now, you can just casually mention, right? Yep, well, I'm here if you need me. It doesn't have to be much more than that if you don't want it to be. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. So it's the first month that your youth is off at college, and they are calling or texting you basically every single day to ask about how to handle someone in their intro to journalism class that's being rude to them. You're getting communications about this most days. How do you feel about this? What do you do? All right. Hopefully you have jotted down some thoughts. Feel free to pause if you're not done. Again, I am not the authority on this. Hopefully you're coming at this with that lens of support, even if maybe it's a little bit frustrating. Maybe you're wanting them to kind of be a little bit more independent and not rely on you so much. You're hopefully having empathy. You're understanding this is a tough time for them. How can I clearly communicate that maybe they could find someone else to talk to? Maybe this might be a good opportunity for them to have a conversation with this person. Whatever that might be, that advice that you might give, how might you communicate that to them? Or if you are really, really comfortable and really, maybe you're like, score, they are using me as their resource. Like, this is exactly what I wanted, right? That can be a super validating feeling. Totally understand. Also, maybe that's an opportunity to start thinking about, okay, I'm really glad clearly they feel super comfortable with me. That does not have to change. That is set, check, awesome. How might I also encourage them to seek some other supports with this, to try to problem solve this on their own? And that doesn't have to be a patronizing or belittling conversation at all. It can be a very open and communicative one. But I know that's a lot easier said than done. So that's why I'm giving you the opportunity to think about it. And you can always think about this as much as you want. All right. So the next one, you have always had very strict rules around dating for your kids. They're now in their first month of college, and they're going to college just in the next town over from where you live. One Friday night, you are in the area in that next town over, and you're dropping off your younger kid at basketball practice. And as you're driving away, as you're dropping them off, you drive by a corner and you see your college kid, and they're standing on the corner with someone else. And that person has their arm around them. Both of them are laughing. It looks like they're on a date. How do you respond to this? That's never really been a thing. You've never talked about it. What goes through your mind, and how might you approach this, if at all? All right. So maybe I'll have some thoughts on this. Another sort of follow-up scenario with this one is, how or would this scenario change, or your response to the scenario change, if instead of looking happy and laughing and their arm around this person, they looked maybe a little bit less happy, they looked unhappy? Would your response change? Again, there's no right or wrong answers here necessarily. And another follow-up to consider is, if you checked in with them about it, who's that? You okay? What's going on? And they said everything was fine, what would you do then? So these are just some more questions to ponder. I am going to keep moving, but feel free to write those down. to come back to it later. That's my hope, is that just people start thinking about this stuff, right? All right. You like to text your youth and check in on them. That's your relationship. And every time you ask them what they're up to, they're at college, of course, and they mention that they're hanging out with the same person every time. It's like, I'm with Jared, right? Every single time. What are your reactions to this, if any? What do you do, if anything? All right. So with this one, I like to think about what's the tone of things, right? The context. Are they struggling in other areas? Does it seem like this is correlated, this constantly being with this other person is correlated with maybe some detriment in some other areas? Maybe they're not doing so hot in their classes. Maybe their other relationships are kind of falling by the wayside. Maybe their relationship with you is falling by the wayside a little bit. Context is everything here. But again, hopefully you all have some thoughts on this. And again, I'm totally not here to share, here's the correct answer, here's the incorrect answer. All right. So your youth has had a great first semester of college, and they're now home for winter break. They mentioned to you that they're going to go to a New Year's Eve party with some of their old classmates from high school. They were never allowed to go to parties in high school, and they always had an 11 p.m. curfew when they lived at home. What are your thoughts on this? So with this one, I like to think about how might this maybe going to this party or doing something different once they're a college student now, how might this affect their relationship formation, maybe with these high school people, maybe with other people? And then what are appropriate boundaries? What are appropriate boundaries for you to set, you to hold, them to shift a little bit? And if you are holding these boundaries, can they be a part of that conversation? Can this be a dialogue that you two are having together? Right. Right. Moving on. You are on the phone with your youth and they're excitedly telling you about an essay that they're writing for their philosophy class. They're like getting super into it, telling you all the readings. And so you're like, great, that's awesome. Like, love hearing about that. And then a little bit later in the conversation, you try to pivot a little bit and you ask them about how they're liking the people in their dorm so far. And when you ask this question, their tone changes. They say, we're all fine. Actually, I got to go. I'll talk to you later. So think on this. Get back in a couple seconds here. All right. So a lot of different things could be going on here, and it's impossible to know from a fake scenario. And of course, still impossible to know with your actual real flesh and blood human being. But it is possible that they are just really comfortable talking with you about classes and not about friends. I know I definitely, as I mentioned, I definitely had that dynamic in college. There were different people that I'd want to reach out to about different things. I remember, there's a point where I would never really ask my mom to proofread a paper. That would make me feel like just not my thing. I would also never ask my dad about a social situation or a social dynamic, right? And these are things that people have their preferences, right? Of course, he might be worried, totally natural. Maybe a follow-up question to this scenario would be, what happens when you call next time? What do you do? Do you bring it up? Do they bring it up? These are things to think through, things that might be helpful to think through before they actually go. All right. You're on the phone with your youth, or maybe you're texting them, and they tell you about a first date that they went on the night before. and they are super excited. And even though it's only October, they ask you very genuinely if this person can come home to stay with them for the summer. Think on this one. I'll give you a couple seconds here. All right. So with this one, a lot of different responses you could have. None are right or wrong necessarily, but I like to think about with this one that balance between being realistic and being validating, right? You might be thinking, well, I mean, you just went on your first date with them and it's only October. How could you ever be thinking about the summer? How could you know this is going to, and those are all totally valid concerns and thoughts, especially for someone, an adult, a more grown adult in their life who is supporting them. Totally okay to be realistic, to think through those logistics and to maybe self-reflect with them. But also remember to validate the way that they're feeling, right? And this is what I talked about earlier. Even though it might seem a little bit silly or not super rational or realistic, it feels important to them. They are asking you this because it feels important to them. They're not making a joke. They're not laughing. They're asking you seriously, and they're really excited about it. And that is important. These relationships that you can form early on in college, even if you look back on them 15 years later and you think, oh, that was kind of silly. At the time, it was important, and that means that it's important. So just remembering that. All right, in our final scenario here, you are texting your youth and you kind of ask them how it's going, and they reply, really tired, but about to go out, LOL, everyone's going. How do you feel when you get this? What are your responses, reactions? I'll give you a couple seconds here. So of course, there's a million different ways that you might feel when you get this. You might respond, maybe you don't think anything of it, also totally fine. Maybe you're like, oh, take care of yourself, right? There's a whole lot of myriad of responses. And, you know, you might, again, this might be a time to model that, hey, it's okay to take some time for yourself, whether that's directly telling them that or just kind of signaling like, yeah, sometimes, you know, I'm really tired. I just take a night in. Depending on your relationship with your youth, that might make them kind of step back and say, oh, actually, good point. Or it might make them be like, oh, well, I'm fine. I'm going out. Yeah, I'm not like a lame parent. Like I'm going out, right? And again, we can't control what they do. We can only control what we do. But this might be a place to practice that modeling of, hey, taking time to yourself is totally okay, totally healthy, all that good stuff. All right. So with that, that concludes our scenarios and our webinar today. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, we would love to hear from you. So the general email for our department is listed right here, prevention@dvssnoco.org. And further resources over here on the right, we do have here at Domestic Violence Services, we have a 24-hour support line. And so this can be shared again with people you know, 425-25-ABUSE or 425-252-2873. I've also listed the National DV hotline as well as the National Teen Dating Violence hotline, since we are talking about college youth. So those are the resources, might be relevant to you right now. Thank you so much again for watching. I'm going to stop sharing my screen to be a little bit bigger. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your day, whatever you're doing and wherever you are. And I hope to see you at our next, hopefully live webinar. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.